Like you've heard my colleagues do on this panel, it's Donald Trump, baby.
Yep.
It's all about Donald Trump, right? The old pivot. We're not going to talk about what's going on in Somalia and not going to talk about what's going on in Minnesota with this massive fraud scandal. We're going to talk about Donald Trump. With my remaining seconds, can we play the video I have, Mr. Chairman?
Something just happened in Congress that Democrats did not expect. They tried the usual playbook: pivot, blame, bring up Trump. But then Congressman Eli hit play, and suddenly the shouting stopped. If you believe hearings should focus on facts instead of political distractions, hit like and subscribe to Capital Truthline. Because what came out of this Minnesota scandal is bigger than most people realize.
Viral videos from a young man YouTuber who was literally creeping around daycares by himself, making claims about fraud that were not there. And then the vice president and the FBI director were retweeting these videos without even verifying if they were true. So we're not accusing people of being xenophobic and racist. They are being xenophobic and racist, including the President of the United States. And I want to say, for one, that I stand with the Somali and the immigrant community standing here today.
Mr. Hudson, are you just hearing from Republicans on this, or are Democrat constituents like, oh my God, I'm struggling to put my kids in school, struggling to make ends meet, and my tax dollars are being robbed by people, and then they're sending it all over the place, and this is complete fraud. What is going on, and why hasn't anything been done about it?
I'll give you a personal example. So my family, my in-laws in particular, are politically diverse. A lot of them vote for Democrats, and they're fairly apolitical. They're not like me, all plugged in. And so I kind of use them as a bellwether for what the people are thinking. Across the board, everybody is upset about this fraud.
And I'm guessing when you guys bring this up, whether it's to the Waltz administration, whether it's to the AG, the number one thing that comes back at you is you're a racist, you're a white supremacist, or you're an Islamophobe. As we've seen Governor Waltz now trying to answer for these questions, he's doing it at the national level. Do you guys hear the same thing at the state level as well?
Yes, absolutely. They always pivot to the divisive. As I stated in my opening statement, it's diversion, right? We're going to talk about personalities. We're going to talk about partisan politics. We're going to find some way to get people yelling at each other rather than looking at the problem.
Or, like you've heard my colleagues do on this panel, it's Donald Trump, baby.
Yep.
It's all about Donald Trump, right? The old pivot. We're not going to talk about what's going on in Somalia and not going to talk about what's going on in Minnesota with this massive fraud scandal. We're going to talk about Donald Trump. With my remaining seconds, can we play the video I have, Mr. Chairman?
horta aad iyo aadaan ugu faraxsanahay in maanta safaari aan soo gaarnay sida dadka badan ay u og yihiin ciyaalkeena yaryar ilaa iyo number la eg 20 milyan oo ciyaal iskuuley ah waxay cuntadooda ka helaan iskoolka kaliya marka waxaan fursad u helnay in aan sharci soo gudbino oo la dhahayo Meals Act oo u fududeynayo in waqtigaanay pandemic aan ku jirno oo dhalinyarada iskoolka aynan joogin oo guryahooda ay joogaan aynan gaajoonin oo familkoodi wili ay fursad u helaan in cunto ay helaan oo meelo qaarkood laga qaybinayo ay cuntada ka soo qaadan karaan marka aadaan ugu mahad celinaya safari in ay tahay meelaha sayti oo diyaarinayo cunto maalin kasto dhalinyarada ciyaalkii iyo familkoodina ku taakuleynaayo cuntada sayti maalintii kaliya safari waxay cunto siisaa 2300 oo ciyaal ah iyo familkooda taas waa mid muhiim ah sida aad u ogtihiin dhalinyaro badan gaajo ku nool wadankaanayti ama familkooda fursad u helin in quraac qada iyo casho ay siiso marka in qadada sayti ay meel ka helaan aad ay u muhiimsan tahay bishan ramadaanka oo familiyaalkeena badan iyagoo aan shaqo haysanin iyagoo aan taakulayn kale helaynin in aynan ka walwalin ciyaalkooda yaryar sidii ay qada ku siin lahaayeen waa muhiim marka waxaan u mahad celinayaa safari oo kaleete iyo dadka badan oo maalin ilaahay keeno fursad u qaatay in ay u volunteer gareeyaan oo ay taakuleeyaan familiyaalka.
One thing that is so alarming is the reporting that many of these fraudulent companies are then donating the stolen money back to the same Democrats that are protecting them and advocate for these very programs. Is that correct, Mr. Hudson?
I would agree with that statement.
Well, we just had one of my Democrat colleagues said these are just opinions. You know, are these guys donating money back to Democrats?
Yes, they are.
I'd like to enter into the record, Mr. Chairman, an article from Breitbart News saying, with the title being Database Searches Show Somali Fraudsters Funding Democrat Politicians. So these aren't opinions.
Without objection.
There's actually reporting on this. Are you guys aware? You guys are elected officials in Minnesota, right? Are you guys aware of the reporting that some of the stolen money is getting funneled back to the Islamic terror group Al-Shabaab in Somalia? Mr. Robbins.
Yes, sir. And we have evidence of it going back as far as 2012, where a man was convicted of sending $21,000 to Al-Shabaab. In 2011, 2 Minnesota women were convicted of sending money to different groups. Someone else, we have multiple references of how the Al-Shabaab takes a cut when the money gets to Somalia through the Hawala network. So I think there's ample evidence on this.
The moment started exactly how you'd expect in Washington. Democrats pivoted the conversation back to Donald Trump. Not the fraud allegations. Not the taxpayer money. Not the questions about where the funds went. Trump. Again. But that's when Eli Crane stepped in and did something different. Instead of arguing, he asked for a video to be played. And the tone of the room changed immediately. Because the issue at the center of this hearing wasn't a political talking point. It was the massive fraud scandal connected to pandemic-era food programs in Minnesota, widely known as the Feeding Our Future case. Billions of taxpayer dollars were meant to feed children during COVID. Instead, prosecutors allege huge portions were siphoned through fake meal programs and shell organizations. This is one of the largest pandemic fraud cases in U.S. history. And during the hearing, Crane pressed witnesses on something that's been driving voters across Minnesota crazy. Not just Republicans. Regular families. Parents struggling to afford childcare. People watching their taxes go up. Citizens wondering how fraud could reach this scale. Witnesses said something important. They hear anger from voters across the political spectrum, including Democrats. Because when fraud gets this big, it stops being partisan. Then the hearing went even further. Crane entered reporting into the congressional record alleging that some individuals connected to the fraud were also making political donations. That claim immediately raised eyebrows. Because if true, it raises a serious question. Were politicians defending programs that were being abused by people financially tied to campaigns? Now, to be clear, federal prosecutors have already charged dozens of individuals connected to the Minnesota fraud investigation, and multiple convictions have happened or are ongoing in related cases. But the hearing also touched on another controversial claim. Whether any money connected to fraud networks may have been transferred overseas through informal financial systems used in parts of East Africa. One group mentioned during testimony was Al-Shabaab, which the U.S. government designates as a terrorist organization. That's a serious allegation, and one that investigators historically treat very carefully because proving financial links requires hard federal evidence and court rulings. Still, what mattered politically in that room was this. The conversation shifted away from accusations of racism and back toward accountability. And that's why the moment stood out. Because the hearing revealed a bigger political strategy playing out in real time. When fraud allegations surface, the debate often becomes about motives instead of facts. Who's asking the question? Why they are asking it? What their politics are? Instead of the underlying issue. And when Crane played the video, the dynamic flipped. For a few minutes, the discussion wasn't about personalities. It was about the scandal, the money, and who failed to stop it. That's why this hearing is getting attention. Because regardless of party, Americans tend to agree on one thing. If taxpayer money meant for children was stolen, people want answers. And if political leaders ignored warning signs, voters want accountability. So here's the real question. Is Washington finally going to dig into how this fraud exploded? Or will the conversation keep getting redirected? Let me know what you think. Was this a real turning point in the hearing? Or just another moment that will disappear in the news cycle? Like, comment, and subscribe. Because stories like this don't stay buried forever.